Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me this afternoon in the locker room. I'm Alan Locher. Little House on the Prairie's Dean Butler is here today to tell us about his new memoir, Prairie Man, My Little House Life and Beyond. The book is available to pre-order right now and will be released on June 25th. Dean invites the readers on a heartwarming journey of entertainment, love, and life, told with the characteristic candor and wholesome charm that reflects the beloved characters he's played. Prairie Man is sure to delight fans of Little House on the Prairie as the 50th anniversary of the series approaches this September. Dean played Almanzo Wilder, the husband of Laura Ingalls Wilder, on the original NBC series, which ran from 1974 to 1982 and was based upon Ingalls Wilder's beloved books for young readers. It is my pleasure to welcome Dean Butler to the locker room. Hey, Dean.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for doing this. As I told you, I finished the book on Sunday. I couldn't put it down, and I really think fans of yours and the series are just going to love it.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope you're right. You've read, so I'm your word because you've read probably a lot of actor memoirs at this point, given the
I've read a few.
So thank you for that. I appreciate it. It was a real journey for me. I had been asked for years if I was going to write a book. And when the pandemic swept in on us and really upset everything that everyone was doing, during that time, it became more clear to me that the 50th anniversary of Little House was just around the corner. I mean, in publishing terms, 3 years, nothing. So I really had to start thinking about it. And I made the decision based on the fact that Melissa had written a book, Alice had written a book, Karen had written a book, Charlotte Stewart wrote a book, Ketty Lester wrote a book, Melissa Francis wrote a book, Wendy Lou Lee, Baby Grace, wrote a book, Jennifer Donati, who was Baby Rose, just wrote a book. The only male associated with the program, directly associated with the program, that's written a book or who did write a book was Kent McCrae, who was a wonderful producer, and he wrote a book about his career in television. It's a wonderful primer for anybody who wants to understand television, beginning in the live era of television, and his work, extensive work with Michael Landon, which took him through Highway to Heaven and Us. It's a beautiful story, but no cast members, no male cast members had written a book. So I decided with the 50th anniversary coming, this was the time. So I crafted a proposal and sent it through my friend Mary McDonough, who played Erin Walton on The Waltons, another wonderful show from the 70s that really celebrated families. And her editor called me the next day and made an offer, and it just felt like kismet. And I said, okay, let's go.
Was it surprising how fast the offer came in?
It was. I mean, it was less than 24 hours.
Wow.
He read the proposal and made an offer the next day. And I just thought that was incredible. And I'd spoken to agents, Alan, who said, I contacted a literary agent I worked with, asked if he'd represent me in this. And he said, sure, I'll represent you, but no one's going to buy a book from you. I mean, it's like, you'll pay them to write the book. You should do self-publishing. And look, I was wide open to that possibility. I thought, well, self-publishing is becoming a much more mainstream thing to do. You can do a really good job that way. But when Kensington Publishers called me and wanted to do it with what to me was a very generous offer to do this, I just thought, this is what I'm going to do. And what was great about that, Alan, is I know me well enough to know that I need deadlines to do something.
Oh, okay.
We live in a pressure world, and I need some of that pressure. If this was totally on me to do this on a schedule where I had no responsibility to anybody else, I could have dragged this out a long time. As it was, I started writing on January 10th, 2023 at 5 a.m. in the morning in front of my computer with a cup of coffee. And I worked steadily every morning, 7 days a week, and turned in my first draft on July 31st, 2023. And it was really, you get to, if you've done that, anybody who's done this, you sort of, it's something you look forward to every day. Now, I never knew what I was going to write each day. I didn't know if I was going to write 500 words, 1,000 words, 2,500 words. I didn't know. And I didn't worry about that, because sometimes it comes quick and very clearly, and other times you're sort of noodling around trying to figure out where your outline's taking you. But the fascinating thing is, it is like peeling back the layers of an onion, and your life does open up in front of you through your fingers on the keyboard as the memories of one thing trigger other memories and other memories and other memories. So it becomes it's a very interesting introspective process to do. And so I had a really good time.
I love that. What's your hope that readers take away, from your life experience?
Yeah. Well, what I hope they take away from Prairie Man, is my enormous sense of gratitude. It's a very genuine sense of gratitude for so many good things that have happened to me along the way. Little House on the Prairie really being, other than my own family, who I was, we have no control on how we come in. None of us have any control about how we come into this world. We just don't have that. So I was started with that, very fortunate to be born into the family I was born into. But then after that, there is no gift in my life that has been as powerful in so many aspects of my life as Little House has been. And I don't think that I ever could have predicted that. And when I came into this world, this television world, I didn't know enough about it to have appreciation. I mean, a television series was a television series. You wanted to be on I wanted to be on television. Not every actor did, but I wanted to be on a television series. And I would have been happy to be on any television series. As what you come to find out after being in this world is there's a difference. Not all television series are the same, and they don't all have the same impact. And I never could have predicted the show based on the writings of Laura Ingalls Wilder, on her books that began being published in the early 1830s, would generate this enormous level of love and admiration and appreciation that they have. And to be at the center of that, having played the character I played, I mean, it's an incalculable gift. It's been remarkable.
I love that. And I have to say, I love in the book how you describe how the book, the series came to be, which I'll let readers do. But I thought that was sort of fascinating how, I don't know his name, but
Ed Friendly. You're talking about Ed.
Yeah, who noticed that his child and his family, had fallen in love with the books, which is the genesis of this. Books that really have created this life for you. Share with the readers, because I love you spoke to family, you spoke to executives, you spoke to Melissa and Allison and Karen, I believe, all to sort of, I think, help bring those memories to life again in telling your story.
I wanted to have some feedback as I was writing this. And I wanted to be able to, if not directly quote people, but to be able to accurately represent, as I was having conversation with them about this, what was going on. I mean, I think the interview with Melissa was most helpful. And there certainly were others that were actually, in another series I did, The New Gidget, my conversation with our executive producer, Larry Mullen, who was the showrunner on that. Larry, Larry was one of the executive producers of Beverly Hills 90210 for years, and he just so knowledgeable about television, and that was a great conversation to have. And talking to Karen Richmond, who I co-starred with in the new Gidget, when you get into that when people get into that part of the book, it's really fun to have that confirmation of what we did. And it's fun when you look back on it, when you look back on things that you've done in your life. Sometimes when you're in it, you have all of the pressure of doing it, and you don't really have time to savor it. What's fun is you really are old friends with the people that you work with and that you're affiliated with. That you're really in the world. You're just thrown together with people. Very rarely do you have that choice. It's like you are embraced by a group of people. You are invited in as an actor. That's generally the way it works. And you become part of something, and it's all the pressure of doing it. When you look back on it years later, you can have the fun of reflecting. I mean, it wasn't all brilliant. Sometimes it was, sometimes it was less than brilliant. But you've done this with a group of people where you were vested in this common cause of doing this, and you agreed to get something done. And there's great value in that. I mean, whatever we do, whatever anybody does in their life, you're going to do it with other people. And it's nice to be able to celebrate and remember those journeys that we've all taken in various aspects of our lives with the people you took those journeys with. And that was my purpose in sitting down to talk with so many people I had worked with.
I'm sure it had to be so helpful. You have two beautiful forwards in the book from Melissa Gilbert and Allison Arngrim. When you first read them, what was your impression? Were you just touched? And
oh, I was, yeah. I mean, I asked them both if they would do it, because no one meant more in terms of the people that are still with us today. Those two women, now both in their 60s, they were teenagers when I met them. Melissa was 15, Allison was 17. They are central. The two of them are as central to this at this point as anybody is. And I know they are beloved by people who love the program, and they mean a great deal to each other personally. So to be able to ask them both and have some confidence that they would step in and do this for me, it was very gratifying. It's wonderful to be able to have both of their names on the cover of this book, because for Little House,
absolutely. As I told you backstage, my husband introduced me, and the reason we started watching is because I was interviewing Allison back 2 or 3 years ago. So I wanted to be prepared at that time. And so, we just kept going with the series. But
interviewing Allison is just like you jump in with her and say hello, and you're off and running, and it can go. Allison and I do a podcast together, the Little House 50th anniversary podcast with an actress, producer, writer named Pamela Bob, and we have very spirited conversations about all things Little House. And, Melissa is the center of the Little House television universe because of she played. I mean, very clearly. Allison Arngrim, even though she was as this villain, she grew up being this villain, but Allison Arngrim is the heart and soul of Little House now. There is nobody that means more to this cast in terms of just your day-to-day interactions and connections to the program. I mean, look, we all communicate with Melissa, but no one communicates with anybody as much as they communicate with Allison. And she just welcomes everybody into this, and anybody who was a part of it is welcome to continue to be a part of it. And she, as much as anybody, is just central to the show's ongoing success in terms of our ability to reach out and the opportunities that come to us to reach out and connect with fans who love the program. She's just been essential in all of that.
I love that. And I love that you're hosting a podcast celebrating the 50th anniversary. When you hear that number, when you say that number, does it just, overwhelm you that you're celebrating that anniversary? And the thought that, as actors, roles come and go, but like the impact of Almanzo is just.
Well, certainly the impact of Almanzo for me is significant in my life. There's no question about that. It's very significant. Michael Landon said to me, probably during my second season of the show, he said, people will be watching this long after we're all gone. At 25 years old, that felt like hyperbole. Like at 25,
it rolled off your shoulder.
Didn't think about it too much at 25. Look, Michael was prescient. When he said something, you listened to what he said because he knew things. And he certainly understood television in a way that very few people do. He was really a student of television. And by the time I met him, he was a professor of television. He really understood it. So he knew what was going to go on. And that certainty in his mind, look, we're not alone in this category of shows. You've been associated with programs that had long lives. There are these programs that are out there that have stayed relevant for a long time. But it is a relatively small number of shows that achieve that compared to the vast amount of content that is created for audiences to absorb. And it's, on an annual basis, there's huge amounts of content created. To be among those programs, that smaller collection of programs that is still relevant after 50 years is an incredible gift. And I don't think that any of us really understood what that could mean when we were in the midst of, when you're making something, it's all about the pressure of today, tomorrow, the next day, and all the things that go into doing it. You're really not thinking long term about it. Now, Michael was thinking long term about it because he understood that. I think most of us were coming in to do what we needed to do on a given day. And it's amazing that these performances that come together so quickly, captured so quickly, and you know this better than I do in terms of being a part of the soap world where massive amounts of material are processed on a set every day and kicked out. The fact that this material is captured and in our case has become digital now, it really is eternal now. It's there. We are captured in those years that we all lived on this, and it's going to be part of our lives and beyond our lives for as long as people are watching, and as long as the program can be converted to whatever the next algorithm is, the next codec for the next viewing experience. Now that the program is digital, it can literally go on and on and on.
Well, and the amount of the generations of viewers who are watching it. Daphne just commented, it's incredible to watch the entire series at various stages of your life. There's even more to get out of them when you're older. And I'm sure. This past March, you had a 50th reunion in Simi Valley with 18,000 fans from 27 different countries. I'm curious what Michael would say to that. Like that, 50 years later, 18,000 fans flying to California for this. What was that experience like?
Alan, it was a love fest. It was a love fest. It just was. There was so much Little House love in Simi Valley that weekend. It was I think it exceeded all of our expectations. And, you know, there were a relatively small group of us who were really at the center of this, helping to organize it, believing in it, nurturing it, doing the planning and so forth. I just think it exceeded everyone's expectations. And there was a group of us who did the first panel on the Friday morning, the 22nd. We were in our little house town square tent that had seating for 100 people in it, something like that. Well, when we came out, it was packed at 10 o'clock in the morning. People were spilling out of the tent so standing room only around the tent. And the roar of love and appreciation that we all heard, I mean, it really brought it, I'll tell you, I mean, it really like brought up emotion. It was very, very powerful. When we came out of the tent after 40 minutes of this conversation that we had about all things Little House, there was a line of people half a mile down the street trying to get into the event. It was like those of us who were together at that moment looked at each other and said, we hit the mother lode with this. I mean, we knew we'd sold the tickets. I see ticket count every day as it was growing, but until you actually see the people, it's not really real. But it was absolutely packed. And the beautiful thing, Ellen, was the smiles. It was the smiles and the happiness. You were walking around with a group of people who all shared a common value in their love for this program. You know, any program, any team that has this, you experience. This was our moment to experience that. And it was just an incredible affirmation. We took people on tours of Big Sky Movie Ranch. We put two-dimensional scale size facades of 12 sets on the ranch. We rebuilt the interiors to scale precisely the interiors of 3 sets, interior sets, the Little House, the Church School, and Olson's Mercantile. They were detailed really out of shot on these sets. I mean, if they'd been lit to shoot, and we tried to create atmospheric, but it felt like you were walking into a soundstage when you walked into this place, and looking at people's faces as they walked in and looked at the Little House. As they opened the door, first thing they saw was the interior of the Little House set. People's mouths fell open. And then they looked to their right or to their left, and there was a whole collection of recreated costumes from the series that were beautifully hand sewn by a woman named Laura Ingalls Gunn, who was a distant relation of Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Oh my God.
She hand sewed all of these costumes recreated from the series. It was just incredible to see that. And then the memorabilia gallery that we had Michael's a golf cart that the cast had given him in 1976 after the Christmas in the second season. And no one had seen this, but Michael had given this to one of his gardeners years ago. And we tracked it down, and the man gave it back to us, and we had it restored. And it was on display with pictures of the day it had been given to him on the stage at Paramount. His children came onto the stage and were absolutely stunned by this. Now, you know one of his children. Yeah. They were just stunned. We worked with Leslie, his oldest daughter, and Mike Jr., and they were around a lot. We saw the other children, but as cast, we knew them, and to see them there and to see their joy at what people were experiencing, looking at all of this, and being able to walk on those sets and take pictures of themselves on the sets, to see Willie standing in the corner again. I mean, Jonathan Gilbert, who hadn't done an event in 40 years, shows up at this event. When Charlotte sends him to the corner in the classroom and he goes and stands there, it's like, he's a very different looking guy than he was.
Yeah, I'm
40
sure.
years.
I can't even imagine what it was
watching him do this. It was just great.
I can't imagine for the children, Michael's children, the impact of seeing this experience had to be huge. Huge.
I'd like to. I hope it was huge, because it was so much of this was done with the idea of honoring their father and therefore honoring them. And I think in looking in their faces, we saw an enormous amount of appreciation for what was done on their father's behalf.
Wow.
I mean, Michael was incalculably. I mean, there would not be Little House as we have known it without Michael Landon. And to be fair, there would not be Little House as we've known it without Ed Friendly, whose daughter Brooke was reading the books one morning when he came in to say goodbye to her, and she was homesick from school, reading Little House on the Prairie. What are you doing reading this book? It's a kid's book. Oh, Daddy, I love this book. It's my favorite book. And he goes out and speaks to Natalie, his wife. Ed says, why is Brooke reading this children's book? Oh, Ed, it's her favorite book. These are my favorite books. I've told you for years this should be a television series. The next day, Ed was going to New York. He picked up the book off of his daughter's shelf, took it to the airport, and hid it in a Time magazine on the flight. Ed didn't want to have anyone see that he was reading a children's book. This was really, Ed was one of NBC's biggest producers at that point. He was one of the executive producers of Laugh-In at that time. Very different show. But when he finished the book, he got it. He understood it. And he set out to develop it. And the first big bite that he got on it was when he sent his daughter Brooke up the street with the script to deliver it to Michael Landon's house on Tower Road in Beverly Hills. Michael read it on a Sunday morning, called Ed that afternoon, and was in Ed's kitchen that afternoon telling Ed he loved to direct this pilot, but more than that, he wanted to star in it too. And that changed everything. So it was this dream that he saw, and he had a vision for it. Michael had a different vision, and that vision has been a slightly augmented vision, because he just didn't think the books would support 10 years of shows or any length of time shows. But together, between the books, which were about what people did to survive, and Michael's version of the show, which was all about how people felt as they were doing the things that they were doing, it's a beautiful combination of things, and it has stood the test of time.
It really, really has. Little House had been on the air for 5 seasons when you got called in for that first meeting with the casting director, Susan Suckman, and then had your first meeting with Pa himself, Michael, a few weeks later. And at 22, you were cast as Almanzo. Let's talk about the Little House cast. Tell me what immediately comes to mind, and if you have a favorite memory with each of them. And let's start with Michael himself.
Well, Michael was brilliant at what he did. And I think the thing, probably my biggest, the most ongoing memory of Michael was in the first meeting with him, where it was clear that there was much more to Michael Landon. There was a much different man that was Michael Landon than the Charles Ingalls character that he was playing. Now, I had never watched the show when I went in to read for him. It just wasn't part of my viewing, but I knew promos. Promos were everywhere, and I had seen those promos. Coming into a Monday night show, knew what this show was essentially about. One of the things that was sort of surprising to me, and I always felt this, Michael was a heartthrob as little Joe Cartwright on Bonanza. Women loved Michael Medlem. Michael was a man's man. Michael was a woman's man. He had the whole thing working. I couldn't figure out why when I'm looking at promos, I couldn't figure out why Michael would trade the glamour of being a Western superhero, being a poor dirt farmer in Minnesota. I just didn't get what the appeal of that was until I started to learn some of his backstory about his youth, his unhappy childhood with parents that didn't really care for each other and didn't really speak to each other. Little House for Michael became this way to family, his own version of family right. And I think when he read the Little House script, the pilot script, and probably quickly found these books and looked at them, and I don't know that for a fact, but I just have to believe he did. I have to believe, given his background, that he saw in this material a way to talk to people in a way that was very important to him. He wanted families to enjoy. His big belief was families talking to each other. And I think he had that commitment and that belief because in his family, people didn't talk to each other. And he missed that terribly as a child. And I think he wanted to create television that facilitated, that nurtured that encouraged that communication between people of all ages who were sitting down watching the program. So he did that. But
I mean, let's be honest. Here we are 50 years later and people are still talking. I mean, he really did do that.
He did it. Yeah, he did it. And yet, when you met Michael, there was a really glossy guy there. And I've often said there was a picture in the dictionary next to the definition of big time television star. It would be an etching of Michael Landon. I mean, this guy was bigger than life. He looked like he had just stepped out of the pages of the National Enquirer or People magazine. He had gold Carrera sunglasses on and a cigarette in his teeth and a gold chain with a Star of David around his neck, and his sprayed on chambray shirt that was open halfway down his chest, and the jeans sprayed on with a gun, and his snakeskin boots, big gold buckle on his jeans. And I'm thinking, as I'm coming in there to read for him, this is not Charles Ingalls. I mean, we know he does that, but there's much more to this guy than that. So for Michael, Little House Michael was a quintessential television star. And I think Michael loved being a television star. I mean, he thrived on it. But he also had this heart and soul in him that really deeply appreciated the simple little things about being part of a family. And Michael he devoted his life to creating his own family and helping other people create their families and be part of their families. So my memory of Michael is this duality of this glossy superstar television star and this guy who was very intentionally craving connectedness, love, and acceptance. And he did that, sought that out, and nurtured that in others through this television program. So he will always be a huge presence in my life and in the lives of anybody who was a part of that.
Well, he must be a huge presence in your life. First of all, he gave you the job, and then watching somebody like him just leading the show. I mean, you were pursuing an acting career, and there he was writing and directing. I feel like if I was an actor, like he'd be Superman to me. Like it was.
He was. Yeah, Alan, he was absolutely Superman. There's no question he was. Yeah, he could do everything. He wore the 4 biggest hats on any set, on any show. He was the star. He was the executive producer. He was the head writer, and he was lead director on the program. And Michael had those skills. He could write, he could direct, and he had it. Those are the skills that make someone a great showrunner. When they can do those things, they don't have to act. to be a great showrunner. That was an added bonus with Michael, that he was this incredible presence on camera. But it was those three things behind the camera that he could do that made him an iconic presence in television. If I have disappointment in the show is that I was not able to, because of who I was. I was nervous. I was insecure. I didn't have the skills that he had. I wanted those skills. I didn't even know how to begin other than just watching him, which I did very, very closely, as closely as I could, watched what he did. And, but I never was able to have really serious conversations with him about it. He just didn't have time.
I was just going to say, probably because, when you've got those four hats, you're a little busy. But I also think actors, what a gift you're given when you are working for someone like that, and you can just open your eyes and take in, because you learn automatically. You're just learning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The whole thing was us. You're learning by osmosis, no question. I think when you come away from that, I mean, there are lots of lessons learned, but I came away from it really deeply appreciating, and particularly after working in other situations, deeply appreciating how enormously capable he was of running something that just functioned so beautifully. And that so much of that credit, I mean, Michael's secret weapon, part of being as great as he was seeing the talents of other people. And the person who was really so instrumental for him in getting this done was his producer, Kent McCrae, who was a logistical genius with hiring and scheduling. This is what Kent did so brilliantly. I mean, our show ran like a fine Swiss watch. Kent came into this working, with the likes of Sid Caesar and working live shows with NBC, and he would go on to work with Bob Hope, and then he ended up with David Dortort and Michael Landon. He worked with people who came out of a theatrical background first, and Kent's background was in opera. He studied the production of opera as a college student, and that's a very involved thing. And he absorbed all of that, and then began the process when he was a young man out of college, of translating that into television, first live television, and then filmed entertainment, which obviously in the 1960s, late 50s, early, was becoming the way to capture entertainment, because you had reruns. There had never really been reruns possible before. Film for television made satisfying reruns possible, and profitable reruns that could go on and on and on. And it changed television, and Kent was right at the center of that transformation.
Wow.
So he knew what he was doing, and he was able to help Mike realize all of his dreams and visions as a creative force. So it was an incredible partnership the two of them had.
Love that. Well, we must go on to Melissa Gilbert. You're Laura. You're Laura.
When I met Melissa, my first day of shooting, I mean, there were no chemistry reads. I never had any contact with her before I met her.
Not to interrupt you, which is really fascinating for
I think so,
the impact the two of you had on America. What a fourth.
I think Michael had great faith in himself as to what he was doing. Look, I never met at the network. I never read for the network. Michael made these decisions on his own, and NBC said, "Yes, Michael, thank you," or go with it, because Michael had a Midas touch. I mean, he knew how to make things work, and he had acquired so much power with the success of Little House that he really didn't need the network's approval for anything. Now, when the network asked him or would say to him, we need big shows for sweeps, for those sweeps periods for ratings, he understood what they needed and he gave it to them.
Wow.
But they weren't telling him, they weren't giving him story ideas. No one was sending, Fred Silverman was not sending over notes saying, show about X. Michael sent the note to Fred saying, I'm doing X. And Fred Silverman, I never met Fred Silverman, but Fred Silverman was a great promoter. This was his genius as a great marketer of television. Michael gave him stories that he could market. And then Fred Silverman did what Fred Silverman did. But Michael did understand what made television work. Characters, storylines. He understood what needed to happen in order to grab an audience, bring them in, and hold them. And I think everybody who worked with him could see that. It was just crystal clear. Yeah, but so Melissa Gold, a young, I keep going back to Michael because he's so indelible in all this. But Melissa was a very young 15-year-old when I met her. I mean, she had just turned 15 on May 8th. We met on May 22nd that year. I had just turned 23 2 days before that. So that can tell you something about the dynamic that, that if there's any stock in that. We're two people who, operating fully well with ourselves, within ourselves. We're two people who have pretty strong opinions about things, be a little stubborn, can be all of that. But it was so clear that she was talented, that she was competent. I didn't know that meeting me completely flipped her out because she just wasn't expecting someone at that time so much older than her. I mean, 15 to 23 is a chasm difference. 8 years at that time in our lives is a very big deal. 8 years now is nothing. But then that was a big deal. And I think she was overwhelmed by the fact that I was so much bigger than she was, that I shaved my face every day, that, she said that you drove your own car and had your own apartment. She's living at home with her parents. I mean, I was the man and she saw herself as this little girl. She said to me years later, I was so thinking I'm going to just be such a disappointment to you.
Wow.
Well, that was, being a disappointment was the farthest thing from my mind. One, it didn't, it really in the reality of things, it really didn't matter what the real deal was between us. What mattered is what we could play. I mean, that's what matters in all of these situations. There are relationships that work off camera and they work on camera, and there are relationships that people have on the screen that really don't work at all off camera, but that work really well on camera. And I think we both, I know she did, she'd been there a long time. She recognized how important this was. She read the book. She knew what this character meant that I was coming in to play. I do think, and I've said this to her, and I said in the book, I really think if Michael had done a mix and match session for a chemistry test, I think if Melissa had been given a voice to say, right, I don't think I would have been hired. I just think I was nothing like what she had in mind for this.
Which is really interesting about her. Michael was a lead and she was certainly the lead. That doesn't happen where the leads don't usually meet who is coming in to play. So you are absolutely right. I mean, she was not given that voice, and that's another gift for you, that she wasn't.
Absolutely, it was. It absolutely was a gift for me. I think Michael had a bigger picture in mind. I think he knew that this wasn't about, he wasn't hiring someone to be Melissa's boyfriend, at that time. He was hiring somebody who the audience, and look, in Laura's books, in their real life, Laura and Almanzo were 10 years apart in age. So the idea that there would be age, of course, in those years, that kind of an age difference was very common. That was not a big deal then. I mean, 15 and 25 might have gotten some people's attention even back in that era.
Mhm.
But certainly 18 and 28 wouldn't have. I mean, I think people would have accepted that. People did accept that. That's when they actually did get married, when she was 18 and he was 28. Now, Melissa had to play this at the age of 15. Melissa was very brave. For every bit of anxiety she quietly had about this, and I, came to know that there's a lot of anxiety about it, which presented itself to me as a different kind of acting out that was not always great to deal with every day. But she, when it came time when the camera rolled and it was time to do what Laura needed to do, she was right there. There was never a moment when she wasn't right there doing what Laura needed to do and being the Laura that she needed to be. That's something that she always has said to me. I just needed to be the Laura I needed to be. And I think she also had great faith in Michael. That was a very powerful relationship in her life. Michael was a father figure to her. And if, in the end, if Michael said, this is the guy, she was going to go with that. Despite any personal anxiety she may have had about it, she was going to push through that and make it work. And in retrospect, looking back on it 50 years later, the things we did together, I think there were some moments that maybe might have been different if we'd been a little closer in age.
Right.
But there are a lot of moments that are very sweet that we did that captured a kind of a feeling that Michael was after, that he wanted in this show. And I think that we both know that we did the best we could with, in the moments that we had together. There was never not giving it our best. We always did. And I think the fact that audiences have loved it and appreciated it for so long is, it's a good sign.
A testament to both of you, for sure. Alison Arngrim.
Well, Alison was such a, like a punk rocker when I met her. She'd show up to work in a sleeveless t-shirt and Converse high tops and black jeans and dark black eyeshadow. And then she would transform into prissy Nellie Olson with the curls and the, and the lace and the perfect dresses. But Alison was a punk rock chick. Now, and very bright. I mean, I think, that's the thing that you knew about Alison always. I mean, she's quirky. She was a quirky kid at 17 when I met her, and she's a quirky adult. But there is such a heart in her. And she's so willing to play. She wants things to work. She steps up. And that dynamic, that Melissa and Alison connected right away. And I know Alison, they both told stories about this for years. People were, audience members who saw them together when they weren't working were shocked that they hung out together. I mean, they hate this girl. In fact, they have been dear friends forever. And it's the fact that they were such good friends and trusted each other so much that enabled them to play all these, really sniping kinds of scenes that they played together. And because they always knew that they were each other's corner. And I think they just had a ball doing it. And it shows, it always shows. I treasure the friendship I have with Allison. I think she's amazing. I've come to appreciate Allison more as we've gotten older, and I'm really interacting with her as an adult. Now, all that intelligence is magnified by time. All of that heart is magnified by time. I mean, she's very special. She's the center of the Little House world for me. Absolutely.
With the anniversary coming in September, are there plans for something in September?
Well, there's nothing on air. I mean, Cozy TV, which airs the show, I mean, Peacock airs. I think Peacock is doing a documentary that they shot largely at the 50th anniversary. I think that they're going to introduce something around the 50th anniversary, which is September 11th, 2024. So I think that they're working on something. There isn't going to, but there may be appearances around that time that we may end up.
And I'm sure TV interviews, Today Show, or Good
We've
Morning
done a ton of
America.
that already. Yeah, I mean, and that will be, it's being held for that time. But yeah, there will be those kinds of things. There's no Little House reunion coming that I can see at all. It's not in the cards. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But it's so beautiful as it is. Why screw around with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
It's just so good as it is. Leave it alone. And
you came in season 5, as I said. Did you go back?
Season 6. Actually, season 6. Yeah.
Have you gone back and watched all of Little House yourself?
I haven't watched. I have to say, I don't know that I've ever watched all of it, but I have selectively jumped through seasons. I certainly am familiar with with everything that I was involved in. I mean, I did this and then they did this and they did, but I did. That was one of Victor French's favorite things. It was wonderful as Mr. Edwards. So, I have my sense of, I love the early episodes of the series that I have watched, because I think the heart of this thing was established. Well, it was established in the pilot. It was established in the 2-hour movie. And then in those early episodes and in the episodes that closed that first season, Michael really, and this cast and the company really cemented its place and what it was about for people. It was about family. It was about love. It was about acceptance. It was about coping with tragedy. It was about grace under fire, and dignity. It was all these things. And Michael told these very simple, clear stories. There was very little ambiguity in what Michael did. There was not a lot. Today we see a lot of mixed nuance with characters, where there's good and evil in people, or good and bad in people, and people are characters are written that are really truly flawed people. I mean, in some cases, when you watch things today, massively flawed people, just like shockingly flawed people, more flawed than you'd imagine anyone could really be. Michael wanted stories to be clear. He wanted people to know who the good guy was, and wanted people to know where the troublemaker was. And he wanted grace from the characters who were overcoming the challenges, and he wanted the people who fly enjoyment to get what was coming to them in the end. So that, and they never terminally, he just wanted there to be consequence. Yeah. And I think he was helping people. And I think this is part of his interest in family. He wanted kids to be able to model behavior. He wanted parents to be able to model what kind of parent they wanted to be. And in the people who were the antagonists, the Olsen family, principally Mrs. Olsen and Nellie, wonderfully played by Allison and Catherine McGregor. He wanted the audience to see, he wanted people to see the consequence of the cost of questionable behavior. You know, so they were, look, all these characters had they did have flaws, but their own art never good people were never or rarely deeply flawed. They made mistakes and they recovered from those mistakes. And the show showed in episodes about the recovery from misjudgment, a poor judgment. And there was forgiveness. There was always forgiveness. There was another day. You could come out of this. And it's helpful for people who make mistakes to know that there's forgiveness. And it's also helpful for people who are witnessing those around them who make mistakes to be able to model forgiveness as part of their, and look, we get this in, you know, in religious teachings. And I understand that I am not I'm not a religious person at all, but I certainly get the moral clarity of good and not good. Mm-hmm. And I think Little House taught all of that really, really clearly.
I love that. You make a lot of connections ancestrally in the book between your family and Almanzo. How did you make those connections? Like, what you know, had you thought about that before the book or in researching?
Oh, I think it was definitely, I mean, when I made the decision that I was going to be the first man to write a book, because that's, I mean, Kent McCrae, but the first cast member, you know, one of the things that I started thinking about is, how am I going to step into this? Where do I fit into this? And my long and well cataloged, well written and captured family history that was written in 1915 by my great grandfather. Looking back,
I love how you share that in the book. I love that, and quotes from what he wrote.
Yeah. And the language, it's so interesting, and we see this all the time. And when we look at the way people wrote in earlier times, there's a density to the language that he uses. It's very colorful. It's very descriptive. It's thick, and you really have to take your time to read it. But what I love the way he explained to those in his family who follow him that he wanted his ancestors or those who would follow him to understand that they came, as he put it, from sturdy stock. And he goes back and explains what earlier generations of our family did as part of the settling of the country. And, you know, it was very inspiring to read it. And and I knew I wanted to quote it. I'd read this before. I knew I wanted to quote it because I felt like this was part of the male point of view versus Laura Ingalls Wilder writing this same kind of thing from a very female perspective. Laura wrote it with optimism, with joy, with forgiveness, and she softened things. I mean, Laura herself wrote about, I'm writing the truth, but not all the truth. My great-great-grandfather wrote it with a little more grittiness, which was a distinctly male way to explore these ideas. He wrote about the adventure of it. You know, Laura wrote about baking the bread and keeping warm in the wintertime. My great-great-grandfather wrote about that plunging across the vast central part of the country on this quest that was established in the American ethos of manifest destiny, that we're going to control this from coast to, this is America and it's going to be American from coast to coast. In the doing of that, some very harsh decisions were made. There were things that as a culture we look back on now and ask the question, and I fairly, why did we do that? You can't change it, but you can't change what happened. Never going to change what happened. But hopefully we've gained some perspective about it, and we can look at it and see that there were mistakes made the way we did things, and can't correct what happened, but moving forward, hopefully we can do it better. And I think Laura writes about that. I wanted to get both of those perspectives. I mean, people who know Little House know what her perspective was.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to share something with my family that was a distinctly male perspective, and that's why I included that. And I grew up on a family ranch in North California that had been established in 1885 by my great-great-grandfather. When I was growing up there in the late 50s, early 60s, there was no running hot water. There was no electricity. We read at night by the light of coal oil lanterns. We heated dinner for water dishes on the stove, the water for baths that we took twice a week on the stove. And the children and the adults were able to take, we had a spring that was generating, in a good year, 8 gallons a minute, which is really no water to do anything other than a trickle to do. So water was very spare in those days. You had to be very careful with what you were doing with it. But it was a beautiful way and we rode horses every day in the hills overlooking San Francisco Bay. It was a beautiful way to grow up. And looking forward, as I looked back on this time, I realized I walked in the door with all of that in my being when I went in to meet on this program. I didn't know it. I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking I was an actor going and looking for a part. I wasn't thinking that I was a human being at that time. I wasn't thinking that I'm a human being that has an opportunity to represent something. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized I had this under my fingernails. I mean, this thing that Little House was about, deeply a part of who I was raised to be. So in many ways, I felt like, and I've said this in the book, and it may, people, well, that's a little hype, but I really feel like I was born and raised to be that guy or some guy like that. And the fact that I got the chance to do it is just an incredible gift in my life that I can pull from the past and bring it into the present, and it's going to live into the future. I mean, what more can it's just
not much. I'm going to keep you for a couple more minutes, but if that's okay, are you okay on time?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I love you bringing your past, your life, your growing up, your girlfriend Tracy, who had an influence on how you treated women. Every woman to your wife, yes. Catherine, right? Yeah. Today. Yes. I mean, yes. And here you were, in sort of, kissing, Melissa, with the kiss for Melissa being a big deal, but you were, brought up right. You talk about your parents, grandparents and all of that, but then talk about Tracy and the impact she had on you, truly on your entire life.
Well, Alan, I've been doing the interview for a month now. You're the first person to bring up Tracy Powell, who was the love of my life I thought she was the love of my life growing up. And in many ways, I will always love Tracy. I mean, Tracy is someone that is just deeply imbued in who I am.
Still today.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Tracy, she's one of the finest human beings I've ever known, just deeply decent and principled and good. And when I was getting to know her, when I met her really, like hard for her, I had been dating somebody else, a young woman who got me into the theater at Piedmont High School. I'd been dating someone else, and I met Tracy before the start of my senior year, and just boom. It was like, it was knocked me out how powerful that was. Tracy is someone who believes in people. She is a person who is a person of deep service to others. She comes into every situation, did then, I believe still does now, optimism and joy. And she shared with me, or she gave me this sense that I had this larger value. And she was so good. For her to think that I was so good, that I was good enough for her, was just this incredible thing to me. And I feel like the way that I grew to interact with women as a young man was heavily influenced by the way that
You can see it on your face. Yeah, you could see it. You could see it on your face.
Well, she's huge. She's huge.
I love that. I love the respect, you show her in the book too. Well, Catherine Cannon, your wife, you met on Little House.
We met. Catherine was coming to audition for Michael to play the female lead in Father Murphy, which he was doing with Merlin Olsen, who had been Jonathan Garvey on Little House, and he was doing this show with Merlin. Merlin was the hardest working man in show business at that point. Other than Michael, he was working 7 days a week on Little House and then on NBC Sports doing NFL games on the weekends during the football season. But I saw Catherine when she came out of her audition. I met. I was 25 yards away from her, but I saw her. She saw me. We looked at each other. She was a beautiful blonde woman. We were both involved with other people at that time. And she was married at that time, or just coming out of marriage. I think it was right, in that sort of transition phase for her. I was involved with somebody. We didn't really meet again. We did a lot of things at NBC together because casts get together and doing events for the network. So I saw her a lot. But 15 years later, after I was coming out of my first marriage, which was just not a good experience for me, I really was not ready for that.
You're very honest about that in the book, and I think that's probably very helpful to people hearing that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how helpful it is, but I felt like I couldn't talk about Catherine without talking about my first marriage experience. And when I met Catherine, after that was over, we met at a commercial audition. We ran into each other at a commercial audition, and she said hello, sitting behind me, and I turned around, and there she was. She looked beautiful, and I always remember exactly what she had on, and just the way she looked. I'm very visually. Most men are very visually cued. I was very tuned in to how she looked, and I asked her it's just like a light came on for me. And I asked her for her number, and I raced home and called her. There was a message on her answering machine. This is before cell phones, There was a message on her answering machine before she got home from the meeting. And she called me back, pretty quickly. And we made an arrangement to meet for coffee a couple of days later at her house, where, what is now our house.
Yeah.
And we had coffee together, and we always talk about this. We sat in the kitchen at our kitchen table, which is still our kitchen table. And I watched her at the sink and at the stove and, making the coffee and all that. And I just felt like I really want to know this woman better. There was just something there was something about her that really spoke to me. There was a stability. There was a solid to her. She'd had, a very nice career, but she was real. there was no flighty actress in there. This was a person. She had a son from her first marriage. She was a responsible, solid person. And I really responded to that. And we've been together ever since. I mean, that first coffee, we've never not been together since that first coffee. I've been other places and worked other places and come and gone and all that, but we have been a couple since that first coffee at her house all those years ago. And we've been married for 23 years now, together for 28 years. And we're going to be together. It's going to be we're going to take the whole ride.
All of those, the Tracy, the first wife, all those things happen to get you to this place.
Yeah.
I think, it helps us become who we're supposed to be in the right relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. I often wondered why Tracy and I didn't end up together. You could ask those woulda, coulda, shoulda things together. I think it worked out the way it was supposed to work out. I mean, I come to that conclusion, but I will say, and anybody who reads this book will know, as you pick up on, as you read the book, the deep level of respect that I have for her. She is one of my dearest friends. She remains one of my dearest friends. Sat down and I read her what I was writing about her on the phone. We had a Zoom call. I wanted her to know exactly what I was saying. I wanted to make sure she was comfortable with what I was saying. So, that was very important to me, that she feel good about what I was presenting about her and our relationship and all that. And just a defining relationship in my life. No
That's
question.
Amazing. Well, there was another moment in the book. I will end on this. So as I told you about launching this show, the first actor I called is an actor named Michael Park from As the World Turns. And Michael suggested using StreamYard. And Michael has been on Broadway. And one of his, he calls him his mentor, Robert Westenberg.
Oh, for God's sake.
And so because Michael and I did an interview about a year ago, and he really went in depth about Robert. And shortly after, I interviewed Robert on my show, who was phenomenal. But small world.
Such a character. He is such a character, this guy. He is so buttoned up. But I mean, I haven't seen Robert since 1988. But
for Michael,
he was so buttoned up working with him. He was incredible.
Michael says it was watching him over and over in Into the Woods, the PBS special, that he wanted to be, Robert.
He wanted to be Robert.
Like that voice and his performance. And
oh my God.
What he learned from him.
Yeah. I think he was incredible. He was incredible to work with. He was so supportive of me when I came in and we started working together. And I mean, look, he had notes. He had notes. He had things he wanted me to do, but he was very accepting of what I was able to do. And, as I sort of honed it together, because when you're doing something like what we were doing together, you have to work it out, and it's, he's the kind of guy, Robert was the kind of guy who could tell you that you'd missed your mark across the stage by 2 inches that night.
Wow.
No, he really could tell you that you were off your mark by 2 inches.
And he wasn't wrong.
I'm sorry?
And he wasn't wrong, you mean? Like,
no. I would, that he could be wrong is something that would never occur to me. No, absolutely. If he says I was off my mark by 2 inches, I was. That's just who he was.
Wow.
He was bigger than life on stage. What's so interesting about Robert Westenberg, and he has
his voice is bigger than life.
Yeah, it is, and he really raised that up. to be the prince. I mean, when you talk to him, yes, I mean, you do hear the precision in his speech. His diction is incredible. All of this stuff all of this really, really well. Robert has this ability, like you could meet Robert on the street and you might not look twice at it. He could disappear right in front of you if he want, but when he decides, when it's time to be seen, which is what he has to do when he was stepping on a Broadway stage, you couldn't take your eyes off of it. When he stepped on the stage and turned that up. I had a similar experience in a very different kind of talent, but I had the opportunity in a different phase of my career to work around Paul Newman, who was, when I worked around him, he was the owner of a motorsports racing team competing in the CarX Championship Series, which was America's premier open wheel racing series. And he was an owner with a guy named Carl Haas of Hotman Haas Racing. Paul Newman had, like Robert Westenberg, when it was time for him to be Paul Newman, all of that was right there. I mean, the eyes, the look, the voice, all this, he was really incredible. He could literally turn it up and become Paul Newman. But when Paul Newman wanted to go away, when he wanted to be done with an interaction, Paul Newman could literally disappear right in front of you.
Wow.
You could be looking at him 1 second and turn around and he's gone. You wouldn't see him leave. He just could vaporize in front of you, and you'd turn around and see him riding away on his motor scooter off to whatever the next encounter was that he was going to have. But he really was in control of being Paul Newman. Robert Westenberg was in control, and I have to believe in every aspect of his life, in total control of what he's doing in a performance. He can turn it up and be that thing, and he can, when it's time to be done and he wants to go play racquetball or go out with Kim and have dinner or whatever, he can just be the guy and go away.
That's
and have his life.
I mean, I love that you brought him up. But I mean, you've worked with Sondheim, Lapine, Paul Newman, incredible. Michael, who's watching, said he saw you in Into the Woods.
Oh, wow. Wow. I love that. I mean, what a talented group of people that is. And there's no talent, there's no life force, collective life force like you get in a Broadway company of actors. It is a different, living on a different level. And then you put, as in the Broadway community they do, where Broadway companies all come together for Easter and for different, for Christmas, and you get all these companies in one theater at one time. The energy level, the human energy that exists. I mean, you could light New York City with the power that comes from a theater filled with Broadway actors. It's just an incredible, incredible thing. And that talent, boy, that thing where at 8 o'clock that the curtain's going up and there's going to be someone in every part on that stage and it's going to be great. And you feel that. You really know that when you're in a Broadway company. You never have to wonder whether the show's going to be good or not. When you're in that space, everybody's good. There's a great confidence that comes from that. Everybody can do the job that they're being asked to do. And it was just one of the great years of my life to be able to work on that level with that group of people. I loved that.
I'm so glad, and I'm smiling because I'm also remembering reading the moment of you being in New York City and being robbed. I'll let people read what the cops said to you.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Dean, such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Alan, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you for, clearly you read the book, or you certainly knew we were going to ask about. You figured, I mean, really, thank you. I so appreciate that. And I hope people will consider giving the book a look.
Absolutely. Well, that's, I will tell everybody to pre-order, and the link is up down below on YouTube as well. So for people to
Great.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. I loved the book. Love the book. It's and I didn't, like I said, I didn't watch the whole series. So, it's a great read. Great read. Lot to take away. Lot to take away. Have a great day.
You too, Alan. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks everybody for watching. As I said, thank you to Dean for stopping by and sharing his story with all of us. Dean's memoir, Prairie Man, My Little House Life and Beyond, is available for pre-order now and is out on June 25th. Please tune in on Friday, June 14th, tomorrow, this Friday, June 14th, to celebrate Father's Day with Ricky Paul Golden. Before I sign off, I wanted to make note or take note that today would have been Anne Frank's 95th birthday. She died at the age of 16 at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. We should all remember Anne Frank. Remember, if you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do so down below. Turn on the notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. And if you'd like to stream audio versions, you can search The Locker Room on your favorite streaming platform. Have a great afternoon, everybody. And remember, please stay safe.